A 12-year-old boy walked into the Jerusalem temple and stunned every scholar in the room. Then he disappeared from the record for 18 years. What happened next? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John recorded every miracle, every parable, every healing. And then they left an 18-year gap completely blank. That silence has haunted people for 2,000 years. Nazareth was not a town. It was barely a village. Archaeologists estimate between 200 and 400 people lived there. When one disciple heard Jesus was from Nazareth, his response was, "Can anything good come from there?" The houses were small, dark, and crowded. Families shared courtyards. Nothing stayed secret for long. In a village this size, everybody knew everything about everybody. The synagogue was not just a place of worship. It was the school, the courthouse, the community center, and the town hall, all in one building. It was the center of everything. Every Sabbath, the Torah was read aloud. By the time Jesus turned 30, he had heard the entire scripture read out loud, more than a dozen times. The words had soaked into him completely. 3 times a year, Jewish families walked to Jerusalem for the festivals. 65 miles, a 4-day walk each way. Jesus made that journey every single year of his life. Jerusalem during Passover was overwhelming. Tens of thousands of pilgrims, merchants from every corner of the known world, Roman soldiers, religious debates erupting on every corner. For a kid from a farming village, nothing could have prepared him for this. By the time Jesus began his ministry, he already knew Jerusalem intimately. The temple, its politics, its corruption, none of it was new. He had been watching it all for years. Every Bible calls Jesus a carpenter. But the original Greek word is tekton, which means builder. And in Nazareth, where limestone was everywhere and trees were scarce, that almost certainly meant stonework. Archaeological excavations in Galilee confirm it. 80% of all building materials in first-century Galilee were stone-based. Jesus was not a woodworker. He was a stonemason. 4 miles from Nazareth, just 1 hour's walk down the hill, sat Sepphoris, the capital of Galilee. The Jewish historian Josephus called it the ornament of all Galilee. Right when Jesus was growing up, Sepphoris was undergoing a massive rebuilding project. Multiple scholars believe Joseph and Jesus almost certainly worked there. The work was simply too close and too large to ignore. Sepphoris had a theater that seated 4,000 people. Actors performed in masks. Jesus may have watched them. And he later used a specific word for the religious leaders, a word that came directly from the theater: hypocrite. Jesus used that word constantly. In Greek, it literally means a stage actor, someone who wears a mask and plays a role. He chose that word deliberately. He had seen the performance. Sepphoris sat on a hilltop visible for miles in every direction. Jesus saw it every day of his childhood. Later, he said, "A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." He was describing exactly what he saw growing up. At some point during those silent years, Joseph died. He is never mentioned during Jesus' ministry, not once. And in that culture, a man was always identified through his father, unless his father was gone. As the eldest son, Jesus would have become the primary provider for the entire family. Survival would have been the daily priority. There was no time for exotic travel. Every day was about putting bread on the table. According to Mark's Gospel, Jesus had 4 brothers: James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon, plus at least 2 sisters. That is a minimum of 7 children. Jesus was responsible for all of them. This is the reality that mainstream historians believe defined those silent years. Not exotic travel, not secret teachings, just a young man working with his hands to keep his family alive in one of the poorest corners of the Roman Empire. Jewish education in the first century was extraordinary. Boys began school at age 5 or 6 and memorized the entire Torah word for word, all 5 books, by heart, before they turned 10. The best students moved to advanced study, learning to interpret Scripture and debate its meaning. At 12, Jesus was already holding his own against the most learned scholars in Jerusalem. That does not happen by accident. Luke says Jesus continued to grow in wisdom after returning to Nazareth. The Greek word he used means to push forward, to actively advance. The silent years were not empty. They were full of deep private study. First-century builders around Nazareth had to dig foundations up to 10 feet deep through sandy topsoil to reach solid bedrock. Jesus was not telling a nice metaphor. He was describing his actual job. He knew from years of experience that the builder who skipped the hard work of digging down to bedrock would lose everything when the rains came. That parable was not philosophy, it was field experience. Go through every parable Jesus ever told. Farmers, seeds, shepherds, fishermen, builders. But almost nothing about wood. No carpentry metaphors. For someone supposedly trained as a woodworker, that silence is remarkable. The language of Jesus is the language of stone, soil, and open fields, not a carpenter's workshop. On this rock, I will build my church. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. That is a stonemason speaking. In 1894, a man named Nicholas Nadovich published a book claiming he had found an ancient manuscript in a Himalayan monastery proving Jesus spent his lost years studying in India. It was a global sensation, and it was almost certainly a complete fabrication. When scholars wrote to the head lama at Hemis Monastery to verify the story, the lama denied everything. A British professor traveled there himself in 1895. The head lama denied it again. No manuscript was ever produced for independent examination. But here is what is genuinely interesting. First century Galilee was not isolated. The Via Maris, one of the ancient world's greatest trade routes, passed directly through it. Ideas from India, Persia, and Greece traveled this road constantly. Buddhist missionaries had been active in the Mediterranean world since the 3rd century BC. So while there is no evidence Jesus traveled to India, Eastern ideas may well have reached him through ordinary cultural exchange happening all around him. The Essenes were a Jewish sect who lived in strict communal purity beside the Dead Sea. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were translated, people noticed something unsettling, striking parallels between Essene beliefs and early Christianity. John the Baptist lived in the Judean wilderness, not far from the Essene community at Qumran. He practiced baptism, wore rough clothing, preached coming judgment. All of this closely mirrors Essene practice. The connection is hard to ignore. But if Jesus had contact with the Essenes, he clearly rejected their approach. The Essenes separated themselves from anyone considered unclean. Jesus did the exact opposite. He touched lepers. He welcomed everyone the Essenes would have turned away. Ancient texts tried to fill the gap centuries before modern theories existed. The infancy gospel of Thomas described a child Jesus cursing a boy who bumped into him. The boy dropped dead. Jesus was not portrayed as particularly gentle in these accounts. Medieval British legends claimed Jesus sailed to Cornwall with Joseph of Arimathea. The poet William Blake was so taken by it, he wrote a famous hymn about it. The Japanese village of Shingo claims Jesus lived there and died at age 106. When Jesus returned to Nazareth at 30 and taught in the synagogue, his own neighbors were baffled. Is this not the construction worker? His brothers and sisters are right here. Where did all this come from? They had known him his entire life and seen nothing. Mark chapter 3, verse 21. His family came to take him away by force. The text says they thought he was out of his mind. His own brothers, the people who grew up in the same house and ate at the same table, thought he had lost it. James, the brother who thought Jesus was crazy, would eventually become the leader of the entire Christian church in Jerusalem. Something changed his mind. According to Paul, Jesus appeared to James personally after the resurrection. For 18 years, nobody saw anything special in him. He went to work. He came home. He attended synagogue. He looked like just another builder trying to make a living. Whatever he was becoming it in complete silence. And then, the moment everything changed, the heavens opened. A voice spoke. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Not a graduation from a secret school, not a final exam, just a voice breaking through after 18 years of silence saying, "Now." He had been faithful in the small things, in the invisible things, in the daily grind of ordinary life for years without recognition or reward. And when the moment came, he was ready. Those 18 years were not lost. They were the foundation.